Sarah's boots crunched against the gravel driveway as the massive gates of Fort Marshall loomed ahead. She had dreamed of this moment for years, yet standing here now, her chest tightened with a mix of anticipation and fear. The early morning sun glinted off rows of barracks, casting long shadows across the meticulously maintained grounds. Soldiers in uniform moved with precision, each step synchronized, their expressions etched with determination. The hum of activity was punctuated by sharp commands, whistle blows, and the occasional barked reprimand. This was not just a military base. It was a world entirely devoted to discipline, endurance, and transformation. Her duffel bag, heavy with supplies, seemed to weigh as much as the anxiety in her chest. She adjusted the strap, inhaling deeply, trying to steady the nervous tremor in her hands. This was the beginning of her journey, the first day that would set the tone for everything that followed. She had trained physically for months, running before sunrise, lifting weights, mastering obstacle courses in her backyard. But nothing in her preparation could have fully readied her for the psychological and emotional challenges she would face here. Boot camp was a crucible, designed to forge raw recruits into soldiers, stripping away doubt, fear, and hesitation. The first thing she noticed was the uniformity. Rows of bunks in the barracks, identical lockers, neatly pressed uniforms. Even the sound of voices seemed regulated, carrying the weight of discipline. Every recruit, male and female alike, moved with a sense of purpose, though the tightness in their shoulders betrayed their unease. Sarah felt a shiver of vulnerability. She was just one person amidst hundreds, each facing the unknown challenges of military training. Yet she refused to let the fear dominate her. She reminded herself of why she was here, for her country, for her future, for the proof that she could endure anything. Her first encounter with authority came almost immediately. Drill Sergeant Thompson was a looming figure, his presence magnetic and intimidating. "You will stand in formation until I say otherwise." He barked, and Sarah snapped to attention, heart racing. The sound of dozens of boots stamping in unison against the concrete was thunderous, echoing off the buildings. The recruits were quickly divided into squads, each under the watchful eye of a drill sergeant who seemed capable of reading every nervous thought before it was spoken. Sarah's squad was a mix of personalities. A tall, nervous young man who kept fumbling with his uniform. A petite woman whose eyes darted anxiously at every movement. And several others, all radiating a combination of determination and fear. As they were marched across the base to the training grounds, Sarah took in the sheer scale of the facility. Obstacle courses rose like mechanical mountains, their ropes, walls, and tunnels promising pain and exhaustion. Shooting ranges hummed with the sharp reports of gunfire, and the air carried the tang of sweat, metal, and determination. Everywhere she looked, there was evidence of the relentless expectation that each recruit would be tested, pushed beyond their perceived limits, and molded into a soldier who could endure anything. Rumors of General Hawthorne had reached Sarah before she arrived. Known across military circles as a strict disciplinarian with an almost legendary reputation, he was said to have broken even the toughest recruits. Whispers suggested that those who faced him either emerged stronger or completely demoralized. As Sarah walked through the training yard, she could feel the weight of his presence, even though she hadn't seen him yet. His reputation hung over the base like a storm cloud, a constant reminder that failure here was never simply an option. The first drills were deceptively simple, standing in formation, practicing posture, and memorizing commands. But simplicity, Sarah soon realized, was a trap. The slightest mistake drew immediate correction, often accompanied by public reprimand. Recruits who faltered felt the gaze of their peers and superiors alike, an invisible pressure that threatened to crush resolve. Sarah's hands shook as she aligned her uniform, sweat forming on her brow despite the cool morning air. Each correction was a reminder that she could not afford hesitation. Precision, she realized, was survival. By mid-morning, the true intensity of boot camp became clear. The squad was led to the obstacle course, where thick mud, high walls, and swinging ropes demanded every ounce of strength and concentration. Sarah's muscles screamed as she climbed the first wall, the coarse rope burning her palms. She felt her legs wobble at the top, heart hammering against her ribcage, but she forced herself forward, descending carefully and immediately sprinting toward the next challenge. The drill sergeant's voice cut through the clamor. Move! No excuses. Do it right or do it again. Sarah's mind focused on one thing at a time. Each step, each grip, each movement executed with intent. Despite the physical strain, the mental challenges proved even more daunting. Recruits were forced to memorize complex sequences of commands while under exhaustion, each error punished with extra laps, push-ups, or shouted reprimands. Sarah felt fatigue gnawing at her, but she drew strength from the clarity of her purpose. She remembered the countless mornings she had trained alone, pushing herself further than anyone else expected. This memory became an anchor, reminding her that she had the discipline and resilience necessary to endure what lay ahead. Lunch provided no respite. Meals were quick, functional, and devoid of comfort. Recruits ate standing, conversation minimal, the atmosphere charged with tension. Even here, Sarah's eyes scanned the yard, observing her peers. Some struggled silently, others complained quietly, but a shared understanding passed among them. Boot camp demanded everything, and survival required every recruit to find their inner strength. Sarah's focus remained on adaptation, observation, and learning. She recognized that success was as much about mental agility as physical endurance. Afternoon drills escalated in difficulty. Team exercises required coordination under pressure, with mistakes immediately penalized. Sarah noticed patterns in the general's methods, piecing together his expectations. She began strategizing how to maintain composure, anticipate commands, and conserve energy while meeting standards. Other recruits seemed to crumble under similar pressures, and Sarah quietly felt a surge of determination. She would not only survive, she would thrive. She was learning that resilience was an act of constant focus, patience, and clever adaptation, not just brute strength. As dusk approached, the recruits were herded back to the barracks, bodies aching and minds buzzing. Sarah's uniform was dirt-streaked, hair damp with sweat, yet she felt a quiet satisfaction. The day had been punishing, yet she had endured every challenge. She glanced around at her squad mates, exhaustion etched into every face, some expressing despair, others quiet pride. Sarah's gaze drifted toward the horizon, imagining the weeks ahead, aware that every drill, every test would push her further. And yet, a spark of confidence burned within her. She had arrived, and she was ready to meet whatever the general would throw her way. Later that evening, in the dim light of the barracks, Sarah lay on her bunk, reflecting on the day. Every shout, every command, every obstacle had been a test, not just of physical skill, but of character. She realized that boot camp would not just break her. It would shape her, define her. She allowed herself a small, private smile. Fear remained, but it was now paired with resolve. She had arrived at the base, stepped into the crucible, and faced the first day without surrendering. Tomorrow, the real challenge would begin, and she was determined to meet it head-on. The sun had climbed higher in the sky, casting a harsh glare over the training yard. But the heat did little to intimidate Sarah. Her muscles still ached from the morning's drills. Yet a quiet determination surged through her veins. Today, she knew, would be unlike any other. Rumors had reached every recruit about General Hawthorne, the legendary figure who supposedly pushed even the strongest soldiers to their breaking point. Whispers of his wrath, sharp tongue, and unrelenting discipline had filled the barracks the night before. And now, with every step across the yard, Sarah felt the tension in the air thicken. Her squad moved in formation, boots pounding rhythmically against the concrete as Drill Sergeant Thompson barked instructions. Stay focused. Eyes forward. This is no place for hesitation. His voice was relentless, each word demanding attention. Sarah's heart raced, partly from exertion and partly from anticipation. She had trained her body for endurance, but she was beginning to understand that surviving the general's scrutiny would demand every ounce of mental fortitude she possessed. Then he appeared. General Hawthorne's presence was immediate and magnetic, the kind of presence that silences conversation and makes every movement purposeful. Clad in the crisp uniform of a high-ranking officer, with medals glinting under the sun, he moved with a controlled authority that demanded attention. Every recruit instinctively straightened, their postures snapping to attention as if some invisible wire pulled them upright. The general's eyes scanned the ranks with precision, as if he could see every misstep before it happened. When his gaze landed on Sarah, she felt a jolt of awareness ripple through her body. Unlike the others, who seemed to shrink or stiffen under his stare, she held her posture steady, chin raised, hands by her sides. She could feel the weight of expectation, the unspoken challenge. He would try to find her weakness. And yet, within that weight, she sensed an opportunity. To survive, she would need more than strength. She would need strategy, resilience, and composure. "Recruits," he barked, his voice cutting across the yard like a whip. "I am General Hawthorne. I am here to see who is fit for this uniform and who is not. Every mistake you make today will be noted. Every hesitation will be remembered." The words were simple, but the effect was powerful. Whispers ran through the ranks as recruits exchanged nervous glances. Sarah's pulse quickened, but she kept her breath even. She would not give him the satisfaction of fear. She would face him head-on. The general's presence transformed the training yard into a theater of tension. Drill Sergeant Thompson led the squad through a series of exercises, each more demanding than the last. "You will run the obstacle course. You will memorize and execute every command, and you will do it without error. Fail, and you will start over." Sarah's body tensed as she anticipated the first test. She knew that even a minor mistake could trigger the general's attention. As the squad approached the obstacle course, the general's sharp eyes followed their every move. Sarah's first challenge was a towering wall with a rope dangling from the top. Her palms already raw from yesterday's drills, she gripped the coarse rope, feeling it scrape against her skin. The general's gaze never wavered, and she felt as though every fiber of her being was exposed. She climbed deliberately, each movement calculated to conserve energy and maintain control. When she reached the top, she exhaled, but only subtly. The general's attention was unforgiving. Descending the wall, Sarah could hear the general's voice cutting through the noise. "Precision. Strength without control is useless." He moved closer, inspecting each recruit as they completed the course. Sarah noticed how he observed body language, posture, and expression, cataloging even the smallest lapse. Some recruits faltered, tripping or losing grip, and Hawthorne's eyes narrowed, a silent reminder that weakness would not go unnoticed. After the obstacle course, he approached the group personally, his steps deliberate and commanding. Sarah's squad froze, their synchronized movements becoming almost mechanical under his gaze. When he stopped in front of her, she felt a jolt of anxiety, but also an unexpected surge of focus. He studied her closely, his sharp eyes tracing every inch of posture, uniform, and facial expression. "You," he said, pointing directly at her. The word was simple, but it carried the weight of challenge. "Step forward." Heart pounding, Sarah obeyed. She felt the eyes of her peers on her, some anxious, some curious, all aware that this moment carried significance. The general circled her slowly, like a predator assessing its prey, examining the set of her shoulders, the steadiness of her gaze, the firmness of her stance. "I have heard your reputation precedes you," he said. His tone was neutral, yet it carried a subtle edge. "We shall see if it is deserved." Then came the test. The general instructed her to perform a series of complex physical and mental tasks under his scrutiny. "Show me endurance. Show me focus. Show me strength of both body and mind." Sarah felt her adrenaline spike, each command sharpening her awareness. As she executed the exercises, she noticed his reactions. The slight furrow of his brow, the narrowing of his eyes, the occasional tilt of the head. She realized he was probing, searching for any sign of hesitation or weakness. Her muscles screamed as she moved through push-ups, sit-ups, and sprinting exercises, but she remained deliberate. Each motion was precise, each breath controlled. She mentally cataloged his expectations, noting patterns in his commands and responses. While others struggled, she maintained a rhythm, finding a balance between speed and accuracy. Her determination began to draw subtle attention. The general's eyes lingered, almost imperceptibly, as if reassessing her potential. At one point, he issued a particularly unexpected command, a complex sequence of maneuvers performed under physical strain. Many recruits hesitated, their movements faltering. Sarah, however, adapted quickly, relying on both intuition and training. She executed each step flawlessly, her heart hammering but her mind sharp. For the first time, she sensed a subtle acknowledgement from the general, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. Her defiance was quiet, professional, and undeniable. After the exercises, he addressed the entire squad, his voice calm but commanding. "I see potential," he said, his gaze lingering on Sarah. "But potential is meaningless without perseverance. The coming days will test every one of you. Strength will be challenged. Willpower will be tested. Character will be exposed." The words were not encouragement. They were a warning. Sarah felt their weight, yet also a strange clarity. The general's presence, as intimidating as it was, defined the very challenge she had come to face. As the day drew to a close, Sarah reflected on the encounter. Every detail, every word, every glance from General Hawthorne had been a test, whether he intended it or not. She understood that surviving boot camp would require more than physical stamina. It would demand mental agility, emotional control, and the courage to confront fear without flinching. The general was more than a figure of authority. He was the embodiment of the challenge she had accepted, a living standard against which she would measure herself. Returning to the barracks, her muscles exhausted but her mind energized, Sarah began to recognize a pattern. Each obstacle, each command, each intense gaze was a puzzle. She needed to understand the general, anticipate his expectations, and adapt to survive. While other recruits whispered anxiously or complained quietly, she remained focused, mentally replaying the day's events, analyzing her performance, and planning strategies for improvement. She realized that in this place, endurance alone would not suffice. Insight, resilience, and composure were equally essential. As night fell over Fort Marshall, Sarah lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail of the day. The general had not merely tested her body. He had tested her mind, her focus, her courage. And she had passed, in a way, by surviving without surrender. Fear lingered, but so did a new sense of determination. Tomorrow, she would face more challenges, more scrutiny, and more tests of endurance. But she also knew something important. She had faced General Hawthorne himself and had emerged intact, aware that her journey had only just begun, and that the real battle, the battle to prove herself, was just beginning. The sun beat down mercilessly on the training yard, turning the concrete into a heat trap that radiated into Sarah's boots. Sweat streamed down her face, stinging her eyes, but she refused to let the discomfort slow her. Every morning brought new challenges, each one designed to test the limits of the recruit's physical and mental endurance. But today felt different, sharper, heavier, more punishing. The general's presence lingered like a shadow across the yard, his gaze invisible yet inescapable. Sarah knew he was watching, noting every stumble, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt. And she was determined not to give him any. Drill Sergeant Thompson's whistle pierced the air, signaling the start of a grueling endurance drill. Recruits sprinted to the obstacle course, their legs already trembling from prior exercises. The walls, ropes, and mud pits loomed like mountains. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward, feeling the familiar burn in her calves and the ache in her shoulders. Each movement had to be precise. One misstep could mean extra laps, grueling push-ups, or humiliation in front of the entire squad. She had learned to control her mind even when her body screamed for relief, and she channeled that discipline now. The first obstacle was a tall, slick wall. Sarah grabbed the rope and pulled herself upward, fingers blistering almost instantly. The heat made the rope sting, and her arms quivered, threatening to give way. She felt the eyes of the general burning into her back, even though he was several yards away. It was as though he could see every decision she made, every ounce of effort she expended. She forced herself to focus on the climb, ignoring the fire in her palms, the screaming of her muscles, and the fear of failure. Step by step, she made it to the top. From the top of the wall, she had no time to rest. A rope swing spanned a pit filled with mud, requiring balance, upper body strength, and unwavering focus. Other recruits faltered, slipping into the muck below, their frustrated cries echoing across the yard. Sarah swung herself forward with a controlled rhythm, feeling her heart pound in her chest. Every movement was deliberate, every grip calculated. When she landed on the far side, mud splattered across her uniform, but she stood tall, pushing forward with no hesitation. She had learned early that hesitation was the enemy in this place. The general's voice cut through the clamor like a whip. Precision, endurance, willpower. His words weren't encouragement. They were commands. Sarah felt them in her bones, understanding that survival meant more than completing the course. It meant embodying discipline, composure, and focus. The next obstacles were no less punishing. Crawling through narrow tunnels, leaping over barriers, and climbing a cargo net that threatened to pull her backward with every step. The sun burned her skin, and her lungs screamed for air, but she pushed forward, each movement a statement of determination. As the drill progressed, recruits began to falter. Whispers of exhaustion ran through the ranks, and some collapsed completely, unable to continue. The general's gaze was relentless, scanning for weakness, recording every misstep. Sarah's mind raced with strategies to conserve energy while maintaining flawless execution. She noticed patterns, the specific rhythm the general expected during certain maneuvers, the precise positioning of hands and feet that minimized fatigue, the mental focus that kept mistakes at bay. She adapted, using both intuition and training to stay ahead of the physical and mental strain. By midday, the heat and exertion were almost unbearable. Recruits were drenched in sweat, their uniforms plastered to their skin, muscles trembling with exhaustion. Yet Sarah pressed on, driven by a combination of determination and necessity. She had learned that in this environment, endurance alone was not enough. The mind had to remain sharp, even when the body screamed for relief. She visualized each movement before executing it, anticipating the course, calculating her energy reserves, and maintaining perfect form. Every step became a deliberate act of survival. Midway through the course, a new challenge was introduced, a timed mental exercise embedded in physical strain. Recruits were required to memorize and execute complex sequences of commands while performing push-ups and squats. The combination of cognitive and physical fatigue proved overwhelming for many. Sarah's arms burned, her lungs gasped for air, but she focused. Each repetition was a test not just of strength, but of mental agility. She repeated the sequences in her mind, synchronized with each movement, refusing to let exhaustion dictate failure. Her body screamed, yet her mind remained razor-sharp. Other recruits began to break, slumping to the ground or screaming in frustration. Sarah, despite her own pain, noticed the subtle collapse of morale around her. Some whispered complaints, others exchanged fearful glances, and a few outright surrendered to exhaustion. But Sarah did not. She felt the weight of the general's expectations, but instead of fear, she drew strength from it. The idea that he was watching, analyzing, and testing her only fueled her determination to excel. Each completed obstacle became not just a victory over the course, but a victory over intimidation itself. Finally, the squad reached the last segment, a grueling endurance run with full packs, navigating uneven terrain, mud pits, and steep inclines. By this point, nearly everyone was physically and mentally drained. Sarah's legs burned. Her lungs felt as if they would collapse under the effort, but she pressed forward. She kept her focus tight, her posture controlled, and her steps measured. Each stride was a defiance against exhaustion, a statement that she would not yield, no matter how punishing the test. A general approached the squad, walking slowly along the course, observing their every movement. He stopped briefly at Sarah, scrutinizing her form, her determination, the sweat and grit on her uniform. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. She had endured the course with precision and focus, a quiet defiance in her eyes. For the first time, he seemed to reassess, as if realizing that breaking her would not be as simple as he had assumed. Sarah sensed this acknowledgement, subtle yet undeniable, and it fueled her to push even harder in the final stretch. When the drill finally ended, Sarah collapsed to the ground, lungs burning, muscles trembling, mud caked on her skin, uniform torn, and drenched in sweat. Around her, others were sprawled in exhaustion, some crying, some silent. She felt a quiet surge of triumph. She had endured every test, pushed beyond what she had thought possible, and remained unbroken. The general's eyes lingered on her for a moment longer before he turned away, his expression unreadable, but his scrutiny unmistakable. Later, as the recruits lined up for water and recovery, whispers ran through the ranks. Some marveled at her endurance. Others speculated about the general's reaction. Sarah, still catching her breath, allowed herself a small, private smile. She knew this was only the beginning. The general's tests would continue, each more punishing than the last, yet she felt a newfound confidence. She had discovered an inner reserve of strength she hadn't known existed. In the face of extreme pressure, she had remained composed, precise, and relentless. By evening, when the squad returned to the barracks, exhaustion had settled like a heavy blanket. Sarah's body ached, her uniform was ruined, and her hands were raw from rope burns. Yet her mind buzzed with clarity and analysis. She replayed every detail of the day, every obstacle, every command, every glance from the general. Each moment had been a test, and she had survived. More importantly, she had learned. Endurance without strategy was meaningless, and strength without focus was fleeting. To survive in this environment, one had to combine all elements: physical, mental, and emotional resilience. As she lay on her bunk that night, muscles screaming in protest, Sarah reflected on the lesson of the day. She understood now that boot camp was not just about building a soldier's body, but forging a mind capable of facing extreme pressure without faltering. Every grueling drill, every shouted command, every glance of the general had been an opportunity to learn, adapt, and prove her resilience. Fear remained, yes, but it had transformed into focus, determination, and a quiet confidence that no challenge could break her entirely. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring new obstacles, fresh tests of endurance, and more scrutiny from General Hawthorne. Yet for the first time, she felt a sense of empowerment. She had pushed herself to the limit and emerged not defeated, but refined. Boot camp was a crucible, yes, but she had survived the fire and discovered something vital. Her mind, her focus, and her spirit were as strong as any physical endurance she could muster. And that knowledge, that unshakable confidence, would carry her through every challenge yet to come. The morning air was crisp, almost deceptively calm, as Sarah laced up her boots and adjusted her uniform. The previous day's grueling obstacle course still left her muscles trembling, but a quiet determination simmered beneath the surface. Boot camp had begun to reveal its true nature. It was not merely about endurance or obedience, but about learning to navigate pressure without losing composure. Every drill, every shout, every harsh glance from the instructors was a calculated test, and Sarah was beginning to understand that survival required more than brute strength. It required subtlety, observation, and strategy. Today, the general would not be present in person, but his influence lingered in every corner of the training yard. The recruits whispered rumors about what he had observed, speculating on what challenges might be waiting. Sarah, however, chose not to dwell on speculation. Instead, she focused on mastering her own reactions, finding a rhythm amidst chaos, and identifying opportunities to quietly assert control over her environment. She had learned that resistance did not always need to be loud or confrontational. Sometimes it could be subtle, deliberate, and utterly effective. Their first exercise of the day was a series of synchronized drills designed to test coordination and teamwork under extreme fatigue. Recruits were required to execute commands with precision while maintaining perfect alignment with their squad mates. Any deviation resulted in immediate correction, sometimes public, sometimes silent. Sarah quickly noticed a pattern. Those who panicked or reacted emotionally were singled out, while those who remained calm and observant often navigated the drills more effectively. She began applying this understanding, moving deliberately, noting the strengths and weaknesses of her peers, and positioning herself as a quiet anchor amidst the chaos. During a particularly challenging segment, a fellow recruit struggled to maintain form. The drill sergeant's voice thundered, berating him for every minor mistake. Many recruits froze, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Sarah, recognizing the potential collapse of the squad's morale, quietly moved beside him, offering a subtle hand of support and a whispered reminder of the proper stance. It was a small, almost invisible act, but it made a difference. The recruit regained composure, the squad's rhythm stabilized, and Sarah felt the first taste of influence in this harsh environment. By mid-morning, the squad moved to the obstacle course. It was the same course that had nearly broken them yesterday, but now Sarah approached it with a different mindset. Instead of pushing herself blindly, she observed carefully. Which paths offered the most stability, which techniques conserved energy, and how her squad mates reacted under strain. While others attacked the obstacles aggressively, sometimes stumbling, she moved with deliberate precision. Her quiet resistance manifested as efficiency and control, completing the tasks flawlessly while conserving strength, all without drawing unnecessary attention from the instructors. The general's absence made the environment paradoxically more challenging. Without his immediate presence, a psychological pressure shifted. Some recruits grew restless, testing boundaries, questioning orders, or showing visible fatigue. Sarah, however, recognized the pattern. In moments of uncertainty, composure became a weapon. She learned to act deliberately, making small decisions that reinforced control without overtly challenging authority. By the end of the morning, she realized she was beginning to stand apart, not through spectacle, but through subtle mastery of both body and mind. Lunchtime offered little relief. The recruits ate quickly, standing in disciplined silence. The noise of clattering trays, punctuated by whispered speculations about the next challenge. Sarah's thoughts, however, were analytical. She reviewed the morning drills, mentally replaying each sequence, noting which strategies had worked and which could be improved. She considered how the general might evaluate her performance, imagining his gaze assessing precision, composure, and judgment. By framing each day as a puzzle to be solved, she found purpose in the exhaustion, a way to assert agency in a system designed to suppress it. The afternoon drills tested leadership under pressure. Recruits were paired and tasked with guiding each other through increasingly difficult exercises. The squad was divided into smaller units, with each member responsible for navigating their partner through obstacles while maintaining both speed and accuracy. Sarah's partner struggled, panicking under the strain. Without drawing attention, she offered precise guidance, gently correcting posture, timing, and technique. The result was subtle but profound. The pair succeeded, the squad maintained rhythm, and Sarah realized the power of quiet leadership, influence exercised not through dominance, but through careful, deliberate support. By late afternoon, fatigue had spread like a heavy fog. Recruits moved mechanically, their movements slower, their minds foggy. Sarah's muscles ached, her skin chafed, yet she felt a new kind of energy, one born not from adrenaline, but from control. She had discovered the subtle art of resistance, how to navigate chaos, maintain focus, and assert influence without confrontation. While others stumbled, she moved with precision. While others faltered, she adapted seamlessly. Her quiet defiance was invisible to most, yet it radiated through her actions, a silent testament to her growing strength. As the day drew to a close, the drill sergeant called the squad together for evaluation. Each recruit stood in formation, weary but alert, awaiting judgment. Sarah's attention was keen, analyzing not only the feedback given, but the method of delivery, the tone of voice, the slightest shift in expression. She understood now that authority was not only exercised through commands, but through observation, presence, and subtle cues. By maintaining composure and acting deliberately, she had begun to master the psychology of boot camp itself, a critical skill that the general would eventually test to its limits. Returning to the barracks, Sarah reflected on the day's lessons. She realized that quiet resistance required patience, observation, and strategic thinking. It was not the loudest or most forceful recruit who succeeded, but the one who could endure, adapt, and assert control without drawing unnecessary attention. Each interaction, each movement, each decision was an opportunity to maintain agency in a system designed to break it. She understood that the general's challenge was not simply physical endurance. It was about cultivating resilience, composure, and strategic thinking. That night, lying on her bunk with her body screaming from fatigue, Sarah replayed the events of the day. She thought of the recruit she had helped, the exercises she had navigated flawlessly, and the subtle patterns she had discerned in the behavior of her instructors. She felt a sense of accomplishment, not in overt triumph, but in quiet mastery. She had discovered an essential truth. Strength was not always about brute force or loud defiance. Sometimes it was about precision, patience, and the courage to act with purpose under extreme pressure. As she drifted toward sleep, her mind replayed the subtle lessons learned from each drill. She understood that the general's methods were designed to provoke, intimidate, and test, but she had found a way to navigate them without yielding. The quiet resistance she had cultivated today, calm, deliberate, and strategic, was a shield that would serve her in the trials ahead. Fear remained, yes, but it had transformed into focus. Exhaustion lingered, but it was tempered by clarity. She had begun to understand that to survive, and eventually thrive, she would need to combine endurance with insight, determination with strategy, and courage with subtlety. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, and perhaps the general himself would appear to evaluate their progress. Yet, for the first time, Sarah felt a quiet confidence. She had discovered a method to assert control without confrontation, to endure without succumbing, and to resist without rebellion. The seeds of resilience, planted in the crucible of boot camp, had begun to grow. And as she closed her eyes, feeling the ache in every muscle, she allowed herself a small, private smile. She was learning to survive and to thrive in a world designed to break the unprepared. The morning was heavy with a stillness that seemed almost unnatural, as though the base itself was holding its breath. Sarah tightened her uniform, feeling the ache from yesterday's drills deep in her shoulders and thighs. The sun had not yet risen, and the air was thick with anticipation. Rumors whispered among the recruits that today, the general would personally oversee the squad. Sarah's pulse quickened at the thought. She had endured countless obstacles, mastered subtle resistance, and led her peers quietly. But she sensed that the real test was approaching, one that would push her to the absolute limits of endurance and resolve. Drill Sergeant Thompson's whistle shattered the silence, signaling the start of the day. Recruits moved in formation, boots pounding in unison, eyes forward, bodies taut with readiness. Sarah's mind was sharp, but her body protested with every step. Muscle fatigue had set in, and each breath felt heavier than the last. She had learned that boot camp was a war between body and mind, that the general's presence could crush either if one faltered. Today, she resolved, she would not allow fear or exhaustion to define her. When General Hawthorne appeared, the yard seemed to shrink beneath the weight of his presence. His gaze swept over the squad like a hawk, sharp, calculating, relentless. Sarah felt a familiar thrill of fear and determination intertwine in her chest. Every recruit instinctively straightened, hands tense, eyes forward, but Sarah's posture remained steady. She had faced him before, in observation, in rumor, in the subtle judgments of instructors, yet this encounter felt different. Today, the challenge would not be subtle. It would be raw, punishing, and public. The general's voice rang out, calm but cutting. Today, you will confront endurance unlike any you have known. Failure will be visible. Weakness will be exposed. You will discover your limits, and then surpass them, or be left behind. The recruits stiffened under the weight of his words. Some glanced at one another nervously, fear radiating from their eyes. Sarah took a steadying breath, grounding herself. She had trained for this, both physically and mentally. Her strength was not only in her body, but in her resolve to endure, adapt, and persist. The first challenge was deceptively simple. A long-distance endurance march across uneven terrain, carrying full packs heavier than any she had handled before. The sun rose higher, and the heat intensified, pressing down like a physical force. Sarah felt the strain immediately, shoulders screaming from the weight, lungs gasping, and legs threatening to buckle with each step. Around her, other recruits began to falter. Some staggered, faces pale, hands clutching at knees. The general's gaze swept the formation, sharp and unforgiving, making even the smallest falter impossible to hide. By the halfway mark, exhaustion had set in like a relentless tide. The air shimmered with heat, and every step required deliberate focus. Sarah's muscles trembled, and her body screamed for reprieve. Doubt whispered in her mind. Maybe this time, the challenge would break her. But she refused. She focused on one step at a time, ignoring the fire in her thighs, the burning in her lungs, and the pounding of her heart. Each movement became an act of will, a refusal to yield, a statement that she would not be defeated. Midway through the march, the general added a new layer of difficulty: mental challenges embedded in physical strain. Recruits were required to memorize sequences, relay commands, and adjust tactics while enduring extreme fatigue. The combination of cognitive and physical stress proved devastating for many. Some stumbled, repeating commands incorrectly, or collapsing under pressure. Sarah's mind, however, remained sharp. She replayed instructions internally, calculated her pace, and executed each task with precision. Her body burned, her thoughts raced, yet she pressed forward, refusing to let exhaustion dictate failure. The final obstacle of the day was intentionally cruel: a steep incline covered in loose gravel, forcing recruits to climb under the weight of their packs while being timed. Around her, others slipped, cried out, or collapsed entirely. The general's eyes bore down, noting every stumble, every hesitant step, every sign of weakness. Sarah felt her chest tighten, muscles screaming, but she focused on the rhythm of her movements, controlling each step deliberately. One foot in front of the other, one controlled breath. She could feel the general's scrutiny like a physical weight, yet she transformed it into fuel. At the summit, she paused for barely a second, heart hammering, body trembling, sweat and dirt streaked across her face. The view revealed the full expanse of the training yard below, a reminder of how far she had come, and how far she still had to go. The general approached slowly, his boots echoing on the gravel. His gaze, intense and unwavering, locked onto hers. For the first time, she saw something unexpected, a flicker of acknowledgement in his eyes, almost imperceptible, as if he recognized the strength she had exhibited under relentless pressure. But the test was far from over. He instructed the squad to complete a final endurance drill, a timed combination of push-ups, burpees, sprints, and climbing exercises, all without pause. The general moved among the recruits, correcting form, shouting instructions, and documenting every movement. Sarah felt her body screaming for release, her lungs burning, and every muscle threatening to collapse. Yet she refused to surrender. She pushed through each repetition, counting silently, aligning her movements with precise technique, refusing to let the physical pain overwhelm her mental focus. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Around her, some recruits collapsed entirely, their cries of exhaustion echoing across the yard. Others attempted to continue but faltered, repeating exercises incorrectly, drawing the general's sharp reprimands. Sarah pressed on, each repetition a testament to her determination, each breath a claim of resilience. The world narrowed to her body, her mind, and the relentless rhythm of the drill. Pain was constant, yet controlled. Exhaustion was absolute, yet secondary to her resolve. Finally, after what felt like an endless ordeal, the general signaled the end of the drill. Sarah's body trembled uncontrollably, mud and sweat clinging to her uniform, her muscles screaming in protest. She collapsed to her knees, lungs heaving, hands digging into the gravel for support. Around her, other recruits were sprawled in exhaustion, some crying, some silent, some staring at the ground in disbelief. She had endured, but just barely. The general's gaze lingered on her for a long, silent moment, as though weighing every detail of her performance. Then came a rare acknowledgement. Without a word, he nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, a subtle sign that her perseverance had not gone unnoticed. It was not praise, not encouragement, but something heavier. Recognition that she had faced an almost impossible test and endured without breaking. Sarah felt a surge of quiet triumph, a private acknowledgement that she had survived a moment designed to destroy her spirit. Fear remained, yes, but it had been transformed into focus, determination, and confidence. As the squad slowly returned to the barracks, each step heavy and labored, whispers ran through the ranks. Some marveled at Sarah's endurance, Some speculated on what the general's reaction might mean. She remained quiet, letting her actions speak louder than words. Tonight, the barracks would echo with the memory of the day the general had tried to break her, and the day she had proven herself unyielding. That night, lying on her bunk with her body trembling from exhaustion, Sarah replayed every moment of the day. Every step, every command, every glance from the general was etched into her mind. She understood now that boot camp was not simply about physical endurance. It was about testing the limits of spirit and character. The breaking point had arrived, and she had survived it, not by defiance or rebellion, but through quiet determination, strategic focus, and unshakable resolve. Tomorrow, she knew, would bring new challenges, perhaps even greater, more personal tests. But for the first time, she felt a sense of unassailable confidence. She had confronted the breaking point, stared into the abyss of exhaustion and fear, and emerged intact. The general's presence, once a source of intimidation, had become a measure, a standard by which she could gauge her own growth. In surviving today, she realized she was stronger than she had ever known, ready to face whatever came next with focus, courage, and resilience. The morning air carried a tension Sarah could almost touch. After enduring the grueling challenges of the past days, the recruits were exhausted but alert, moving with a rhythm born of necessity and discipline. Today felt different, heavier, charged with a subtle electricity. Word had spread that General Hawthorne would be present, not merely observing, but evaluating performance, leadership, and composure under pressure. Sarah's muscles ached, yet she felt an unfamiliar surge of anticipation. She knew this was the day that could change the perception of her among the squad, and perhaps even in the general's eyes. The squad gathered in formation, boots clattering in perfect synchronization, uniforms crisp despite the physical toll of the week. The general's approach was silent, deliberate, each step measured, sending a shiver of awareness through the ranks. His eyes swept across the recruits, sharp and calculating, landing on Sarah with an intensity that made her pulse spike. She held her posture unwavering, chest lifted, gaze forward, but inside, her mind raced with strategy. She understood now that leadership here was not about dominance, but about control, observation, and influence. The first exercise of the day was deceptively simple. A coordination and navigation drill, requiring squads to traverse an intricate obstacle course while executing precise maneuvers. The twist, however, was immediate. Halfway through the exercise, a new challenge was introduced. Recruits were paired and tasked with guiding partners through complex sequences while performing under exhaustion. Some squads faltered almost instantly, partners tripping, miscommunicating, or collapsing under the strain. Sarah's partner, a tall recruit named Marcus, began showing signs of panic, hands trembling and posture faltering. Sarah felt the familiar spike of tension, the moment most recruits would freeze, faltering under pressure. But today, she had learned something invaluable. Quiet resistance, the subtle art of influencing and leading without confrontation, had become her strength. She leaned slightly, guiding Marcus with precise, calm instructions. Shift your weight to your left. Breathe. Step firmly. Now. Her voice was soft but unwavering, cutting through the chaos without drawing undue attention from the instructors. Slowly, Marcus's movements aligned with hers, and the pair regained momentum, moving with the squad's rhythm. The general observed silently, his eyes narrowing slightly, as though he noticed the subtle coordination. Sarah felt a thrill. This was not about completing the obstacle course. This was about demonstrating leadership under pressure. While others relied solely on brute strength or shouted commands, she leveraged patience, observation, and strategic guidance. Every subtle adjustment, every carefully placed word, became an act of authority, a quiet assertion of influence that began to ripple through the squad. Midway through the exercise, the drill took a sudden, brutal turn. The instructors introduced a surprise time sequence, demanding rapid execution of commands while climbing, crawling, and balancing across unstable surfaces. Panic rippled through the ranks. Several recruits froze or hesitated, earning sharp reprimands that echoed across the yard. Sarah's body burned, lungs screaming for air, yet her mind remained astonishingly clear. She anticipated each command, calculated each step, and guided Marcus through the chaos with calm precision. The effect was subtle but profound. They moved faster, more efficiently, and with far fewer errors than any other pair in the squad. By the end of the exercise, the difference was undeniable. Sarah's squad had not only completed the course, but done so with cohesion and minimal mistakes. The general's gaze lingered on her longer than anyone else, his expression unreadable yet perceptibly shifted. Sarah felt a surge of quiet pride, knowing that she had transformed her endurance and composure into tangible influence. This was more than surviving. It was leading, inspiring, and setting a standard for others to follow, all without shouting or seeking attention. Following the exercise, the general ordered a brief regroup, addressing the squad as a whole. His voice was measured, carrying authority without unnecessary volume. Leadership is not always loud. Strength is not always brute. The ability to observe, adapt, and guide others under pressure, that is true power. Some of you have begun to understand this. Others, not yet. His eyes flicked over the recruits, pausing on Sarah, just long enough for her to feel the weight of scrutiny. She met his gaze calmly, acknowledging the challenge silently. She had learned, adapted, and excelled. The remainder of the morning continued with more complex team exercises, each designed to stretch mental and physical limits while observing interaction and leadership. Sarah found herself naturally gravitating toward influence, quietly guiding her peers, correcting errors without judgment, and modeling composure under stress. Her subtle acts of leadership created a ripple effect, inspiring others to focus, persevere, and support one another. She realized that her strength was no longer simply in her own endurance, but in the capacity to elevate those around her. By mid-afternoon, the general introduced a final, high-pressure scenario, a mock crisis requiring rapid problem-solving under physical strain. Recruits were tasked with navigating an intricate obstacle while retrieving critical equipment, simulating conditions that tested coordination, speed, and adaptability. Panic was palpable among many squads. Hesitation and fear caused mistakes that led to repeated drills and public reprimands. Sarah, however, maintained focus, calmly directing Marcus and another struggling recruit through the obstacles. Each word, each adjustment, guided them without drawing attention, yet produced results that outshone every other pair in the yard. As the exercise concluded, the general approached Sarah personally. Her muscles trembled from exhaustion, sweat and dirt streaking her uniform, yet she stood upright, meeting his gaze without flinching. He said nothing at first, merely observing, his eyes scanning her form, posture, and composure. Then, finally, he nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, a subtle acknowledgement that carried weight far beyond words. Sarah felt a quiet surge of triumph. This was more than recognition of physical endurance. It was acknowledgement of leadership, strategy, and resilience under pressure. The squad regrouped, and the general addressed the group again. Some of you have begun to grasp what it means to lead under pressure. True leadership is quiet, deliberate, and effective. It inspires those around you, elevates performance, and turns chaos into opportunity. Remember this as you move forward. His gaze lingered once more on Sarah, a silent signal that her efforts had not gone unnoticed. She understood the significance. She had demonstrated the rare ability to turn endurance into influence, and resistance into leadership. By the time the squad returned to the barracks, exhaustion weighed heavily on every recruit. Yet Sarah's mind was alive with reflection. She replayed each moment, each subtle choice that had allowed her to guide, support, and lead quietly. She realized that the turning moment had arrived, not with fanfare or overt display, but in the subtle acknowledgement of her ability to transform challenge into opportunity. She had become more than a survivor. She had become a leader, quietly commanding respect through composure, strategy, and resilience. That evening, lying on her bunk with her body screaming from fatigue, Sarah reflected on the lessons of the day. She understood that true power did not require loud defiance or aggressive displays of strength. It required observation, adaptation, and the quiet courage to act deliberately under pressure. Her turning moment had not been a sudden breakthrough, but the culmination of days of endurance, reflection, and subtle leadership. She had discovered an invaluable truth. Influence, like strength, could be exercised quietly yet effectively, shaping outcomes in ways others might never notice. As sleep finally approached, Sarah allowed herself a private sense of accomplishment. The general had tried, in his own way, to test her limits, but she had transformed the trial into a demonstration of skill, resilience, and leadership. Fear had not disappeared, nor had the weight of future challenges lessened. Yet she now understood that she possessed something rare, the ability to face pressure, guide others, and emerge not only intact but elevated. Tomorrow, new trials would arrive, and the general's scrutiny would continue. But Sarah felt ready. She had found her turning moment, and it had changed everything. The morning sun was pale and hesitant as it crept over the horizon, yet the energy on the training yard was electric. Today was different. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, a mix of fear, exhaustion, and the unspoken hope that today would mark a turning point. Sarah tightened her uniform with deliberate care, feeling the familiar ache in her muscles, but also a new surge of confidence. She had endured the breaking point, navigated subtle resistance, and discovered the power of quiet leadership. Now, it was time to face what she had trained for all along, recognition. The squad assembled in formation, boots clattering rhythmically against the hard concrete, eyes forward, bodies taut with discipline. General Hawthorne appeared, moving with the same quiet authority that had marked every encounter. His gaze swept across the ranks, sharp and calculating, assessing not just physical form, but composure, focus, and presence. When it landed on Sarah, she held her posture, chest lifted, eyes steady, exuding the quiet confidence she had cultivated over days of relentless trials. The general did not speak immediately. He observed, waiting. Drill Sergeant Thompson's whistle pierced the tension, signaling the start of a grueling set of exercises designed to test both endurance and teamwork. The obstacle course had been expanded, incorporating elements from every challenge Sarah had faced so far: rope climbs, wall scaling, crawling tunnels, and timed mental sequences. This final trial was designed to expose any weakness, and Sarah knew that failure, even minor, would be noticed. She took a steadying breath, focusing not on fear, but on the precision of her movements, the alignment of her mind with her body, and the subtle guidance of her squadmates. From the outset, the course was brutal. Recruits stumbled under the weight of exhaustion, muscles threatening to collapse, lungs burning, sweat blinding vision. Sarah moved deliberately, eyes scanning the course and the squad. When a recruit faltered on a rope climb, she instinctively offered a whispered tip, a small adjustment that kept the rhythm intact without drawing attention from the instructors. She had become a quiet anchor, the subtle force that allowed the squad to navigate chaos with cohesion and precision. Midway through the course, the general stepped forward, personally observing the most difficult sections. His eyes were sharp, his presence oppressive, yet Sarah felt a thrill of determination. She moved with focus, executing every maneuver flawlessly and guiding her squad with silent signals and precise timing. Others faltered under pressure, yet she remained composed, turning chaos into coordinated motion. The subtle leadership she had cultivated over the past days now shone unmistakably, visible not in loud declarations, but in action and results. The final segment was a test unlike any other, a timed endurance relay combining running, obstacle navigation, and problem-solving tasks while carrying heavy packs. Fatigue was nearly unbearable. Sarah's body screamed with pain, her lungs burned, and every muscle threatened to collapse. Yet her mind remained razor-sharp. She anticipated each challenge, calculated movements, and adjusted her pace to conserve energy while maintaining perfect execution. Her squad followed her lead instinctively, trusting her calm authority to guide them through the ordeal. As they neared the finish line, the general's gaze locked onto Sarah once more. His expression was unreadable, but she felt a subtle shift, a flicker of acknowledgement. With the final obstacle completed, the squad crossed the finish line together, exhausted yet triumphant. Around her, fellow recruits collapsed, some crying with relief, others panting in disbelief. Sarah's body shook from exhaustion, but inside she felt a surge of pride. She had endured every trial, guided her squad through chaos, and remained unbroken. The general finally addressed the squad, his voice carrying calm authority that silenced the yard. Today, I have witnessed endurance, composure, and leadership. Some of you have merely survived. Others have demonstrated the rare ability to elevate those around you, to inspire through calm and calculated action. His eyes scanned the recruits before pausing on Sarah. One among you has consistently transformed challenge into opportunity, fear into focus, and exhaustion into influence. You have demonstrated the qualities of a true leader. Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but she remained poised, chest lifted, eyes steady. The recognition she had long anticipated was finally here, but it was not an emotional flourish. It was acknowledgement of skill, strategy, and resilience under relentless pressure. The general's gaze lingered, and she sensed the gravity of his approval. In this moment, all the grueling drills, mental exercises, and subtle acts of guidance converged into undeniable proof. She had transcended mere survival and become a figure of influence and respect. The squad erupted into quiet murmurs of awe, some exchanging looks of admiration. Fellow recruits who had doubted themselves or faltered under pressure now glanced at Sarah with recognition. The subtle leadership she had exercised, invisible to many, had become evident to all. She had turned endurance into triumph, resistance into guidance, and chaos into cohesion. It was not victory in isolation, but a shared success, a demonstration that true leadership elevated everyone it touched. After the exercises, the general approached Sarah personally. Every step was deliberate, his presence commanding respect even in silence. "You have endured what most would crumble under," he said, his tone measured but carrying unmistakable weight. "Your strength lies not just in your body, but in your mind and your ability to lead quietly yet effectively. That is a rare quality, and one that will serve you and your comrades well in the future." The words were precise, lacking embellishment, yet they carried profound recognition. Sarah allowed herself a brief, private sense of triumph. She had survived the breaking point, mastered quiet resistance, and transformed endurance into leadership. The general's acknowledgement, subtle yet profound, validated every sacrifice, every blister, every sleepless night of preparation. Yet she understood that this recognition was not the end of her journey. It was a milestone, a benchmark against which she would measure her growth in the days to come. Even as the day drew to a close, exhaustion settling like a heavy blanket over the barracks, Sarah's mind was alert. She replayed the morning's events, analyzing every choice, every adjustment, every subtle signal that had allowed her to lead her squad through chaos. She realized that triumph was not simply the completion of the course or the acknowledgement from the general. It was the culmination of strategy, patience, and resilience. Leadership, she understood now, was quiet, deliberate, and transformative. That evening, in the dim light of the barracks, Sarah reflected on the journey so far. From the first day, when fear and uncertainty had threatened to overwhelm her, to this moment of recognition, she had grown in ways that transcended physical endurance. She had discovered the power of subtle influence, the value of composure under pressure, and the strength that came from guiding others without overt assertion. She had turned trials into opportunities, resistance into triumph, and fear into focused determination. As she lay on her bunk, body aching but spirit invigorated, Sarah understood the true significance of the day. Recognition was not an endpoint. It was a signal that she had mastered the first critical stage of boot camp, the ability to endure, adapt, and lead under relentless pressure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, each designed to push limits further, test strategy more sharply, and demand even greater resilience. Yet for the first time, she felt a profound confidence. She had faced extreme adversity, guided others, and emerged stronger, more capable, and fully aware of her own potential. Sarah closed her eyes with a sense of quiet triumph, the weight of the day settling into something far more meaningful than exhaustion. She had survived the crucible, earned recognition, and transformed the fear that had once threatened to break her into the fuel that propelled her forward. The journey was far from over, but she had proven to herself, to her squad, and even to General Hawthorne, that she could endure, adapt, and triumph against the most demanding challenges imaginable. The morning sun bathed Fort Marshall in a golden light, cutting through the fatigue and tension that had hung over the base for days. Today was the final test, the culmination of everything Sarah had endured, learned, and transformed over weeks of relentless boot camp. The recruits assembled on the training yard, boots polished, uniforms sharp, and eyes forward. Every face told a story, some brimming with anxiety, some trembling with exhaustion, others hiding determination beneath layers of sweat and grit. Sarah felt all of it, yet amidst it, a quiet, steady resolve had taken root. General Hawthorne approached, his presence as imposing as ever. He moved with a quiet precision, each step deliberate, eyes scanning the assembled recruits with piercing scrutiny. Sarah felt her pulse spike, not from fear, but from anticipation. Today, she would face the final evaluation, the test that would determine whether the lessons she had learned, the endurance she had built, and the quiet leadership she had cultivated were enough. She stood tall, every muscle tense, every breath measured, exuding a calm focus that had become her signature. The drill sergeant's whistle shattered the silence, signaling the start of the final challenge. It was a gauntlet unlike any before, a combination of the most punishing physical exercises, mental problem-solving, and team coordination tasks Sarah had faced. Obstacles were stacked higher, timing more exacting, and scrutiny more unrelenting. Every misstep would be recorded. Every lapse would be magnified. Around her, recruits stumbled immediately, their bodies and minds buckling under the intensity. Sarah's legs burned, lungs screamed, yet she centered herself, focusing on precision, strategy, and composure. The first segment was a high-intensity obstacle course that demanded balance, agility, and endurance. Sarah's squad mates struggled, slipping, tripping, and occasionally collapsing under exhaustion. But Sarah moved with deliberate control, not only navigating the obstacles herself, but subtly guiding others through the most treacherous sections. She had learned that true leadership was quiet, strategic, and empathetic, helping others succeed without drawing unnecessary attention. The squad began to stabilize, moving more efficiently, following her unspoken rhythm. Midway through the course, a mental challenge was introduced. Recruits had to memorize sequences of commands while performing physically exhausting exercises. Panic swept through the yard. Others faltered, shouted incorrect commands, or froze entirely. Sarah, however, relied on the methods she had honed over the past weeks. She visualized the sequences, synchronized movements with breathing, and guided Marcus and a few struggling recruits through the challenge with subtle cues. Her calm composure became a beacon, transforming chaos into order. The general observed closely, moving among the squads. His eyes were sharp, scanning every misstep, every hesitation, every flicker of doubt. When his gaze landed on Sarah, she met it steadily. There was no flinch, no fear, only determination and focus. He noted how she guided others, how she adapted to challenges without losing composure, and how her presence subtly elevated the performance of the squad. This was more than endurance. It was leadership forged in fire, a demonstration of skill, insight, and resilience that few could match. The final physical challenge was a brutal endurance relay. Climbing walls, swinging across rope pits, crawling under barbed wire, and sprinting across the yard with weighted packs. Every muscle in Sarah's body screamed in protest. Every breath was a battle, and fatigue threatened to overpower her mind. But she pushed through, relying on the quiet strength she had cultivated, the ability to endure, adapt, and persist even when her body begged for surrender. She helped her squad maintain pace, correcting mistakes with whispered instructions and subtle guidance. As they approached the final obstacle, exhaustion was universal. Some recruits had collapsed completely, others moved mechanically, driven by sheer survival instinct. Sarah, though physically drained, remained fully present. She guided her squad through the last wall climb and over the finishing line with grace, precision, and unyielding composure. When they crossed the line, the yard erupted with exhausted relief, murmurs of admiration, and quiet awe. Sarah's body shook, mud and sweat covering her, but inside she felt an unparalleled sense of triumph. The general called the squad together for final evaluation. His presence was commanding, his voice calm but resonant, carrying across the yard with authority. What I have witnessed over these past days is extraordinary. Many of you have survived, some have performed admirably. But few have transformed adversity into opportunity, fear into focus, and exhaustion into leadership. His gaze swept over the recruits before pausing on Sarah. One among you has demonstrated the rarest combination of endurance, strategy, and subtle influence. You have led quietly, inspired without declaration, and emerged resilient under relentless pressure. You embody the qualities of a true leader. Sarah's chest swelled with a mixture of pride, relief, and gratitude. She had endured everything, the breaking points, the trials, the subtle psychological warfare, and the grueling physical exercises, and emerged stronger, wiser, and recognized. But the acknowledgement was not simply personal. It reflected the transformation she had inspired in her squad. Leadership was not solitary. It was the ability to elevate others, to navigate chaos, and to endure with dignity while influencing outcomes subtly yet profoundly. The general approached Sarah personally. Every step he took radiated authority, yet there was a measure of respect in his gaze. "You have surpassed every expectation," he said, his voice deliberate. "Your strength is not measured merely by physical endurance, but by your ability to lead under pressure, to remain composed when others falter, and to transform challenge into opportunity. That is the mark of a true soldier and a future leader." His words were precise, without embellishment, yet their weight settled deeply within her. Around the yard, her squadmates looked on, some exhausted, some astonished, but all aware of the recognition she had earned. Sarah felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The journey had been brutal, demanding, and unrelenting, but every moment had shaped her into someone capable of enduring beyond expectation. leading beyond authority and thriving beyond fear. She realized that victory was not simply completing the course or earning acknowledgement. It was mastering oneself, navigating adversity, and guiding others with precision, empathy, and quiet strength. That evening, back in the barracks, Sarah reflected on the journey from her first day to this moment of triumph. The memory of the general's first gaze, the initial grueling drills, and the countless moments of exhaustion and doubt seemed distant yet formative. Each trial had been a lesson. Endurance alone was insufficient. Quiet resistance was powerful. Composure under pressure was essential. And leadership could be subtle yet transformative. She had discovered a strength that went beyond the physical, a resilience of mind, spirit, and strategy that would serve her for life. As she lay on her bunk, body aching but spirit invigorated, Sarah allowed herself a rare, private smile. The journey was far from over. New challenges would arise, both in the military and in life. But she now understood a fundamental truth. She could endure, adapt, and lead in ways that were profound and lasting. The recognition from General Hawthorne was not merely a reward. It was validation of her growth, her determination, and her ability to navigate adversity with poise. Outside, the base settled into evening quiet, but Sarah's mind remained alive with reflection. She replayed every obstacle, every whispered instruction, every subtle act of leadership that had guided her squad to success. She understood that the greatest triumphs were not always loud or obvious. They were quiet, deliberate, and transformative. Today was victory, yes, but more importantly, it was the affirmation of the values she had cultivated: endurance, composure, subtle leadership, and resilience under pressure. As night fell over Fort Marshall, Sarah felt a sense of closure and renewal. She had faced the breaking point, endured relentless trials, transformed fear into focus, and inspired those around her. Recognition had arrived, not through spectacle, but through the culmination of subtle, strategic, and courageous actions. She had emerged victorious, not merely as a survivor, but as a leader, resilient, capable, and ready for the challenges that lay ahead. In that moment of quiet reflection, Sarah understood the full arc of her journey. Boot camp had been more than a test of physical endurance. It had been a crucible for character, strategy, and leadership. She had learned to navigate pressure without surrender, to guide others without declaration, and to endure without faltering. She had transformed adversity into triumph and chaos into opportunity. The recognition, the acknowledgement, and the quiet respect she had earned were symbols of a journey that had forged something permanent: strength of body, clarity of mind, and resilience of spirit. And as she closed her eyes, finally surrendering to exhaustion, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace. The trials of boot camp, the relentless scrutiny of the general, and the grueling physical and mental challenges had culminated in something far greater than personal survival. They had forged a leader, a quiet force of influence, endurance, and resilience, ready to face whatever challenges life would place ahead.